My family forgot my graduation on purpose, so without thinking, I changed my name and never came back, and that decision changed everything. They thought they were just ignoring the black sheep. They had no idea they were creating a wolf. Before I tell you how I seized their entire empire 10 years later, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the invisible child who finally made the world see them. I am Maya Vance. Or at least I was, until the night I decided to let her die. Standing in the freezing slush of Harvard Square, I checked my phone for the 10th time. The notification screen remained empty. No missed calls, no texts, just the low battery warning blinking red around me. The air was filled with the sounds of popping corks and proud fathers shouting, "My girl did it!" I watched a blonde girl in a crimson gown get swept up into a bear hug by a man who looked like he had flown in from a board meeting just to be there. She was laughing, her degree clutched in her hand like a winning lottery ticket. I looked down at my own hand, clutching a Juris Doctor and an MBA from the most prestigious university on the planet. My knuckles were ashy from the cold, my fingers numb, but the cold inside my chest was far worse. I dialed my mother, Camille, video call, ringing once, ringing twice. She picked up on the fifth ring. The camera angle was chaotic, focused on a blur of silk and fur. "Maya," she snapped, not looking at the lens. "I told you not to call right now. We are in the middle of a crisis." I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom?" I just walked across the stage. "I am the valedictorian. I thought maybe you guys were just running late or the flight got delayed." The camera finally steadied, but it was not pointing at her face. It was pointing at a corgi wearing a diamond-studded collar. "Declan, stop moving him!" My mother shrieked at someone off-screen. "Winston needs his bow tie perfectly straight for the press." Photos. Maya, honestly, you are being so selfish right now. Declan is about to give his speech for the launch of PetFit, and the dog is refusing to cooperate. We do not have time for your little school ceremony. My father, Reginald, appeared in the frame, his face flushed with champagne and the high of being around venture capitalists. He grabbed the phone, the camera shaking violently. "Listen to me." "Maya," he barked, his voice distorted by the bad connection. "That piece of paper you just spent 4 years getting is just that paper. It does not pay the mortgage on the vineyard. It does not put us on the cover of Forbes. Declan is about to take this family public. His app is the future. Your degree is a hobby. Stop acting like a child and congratulating yourself for reading books. We have real work to do here." He hung up the screen, went black, reflecting my own stunned face back at me. I stood there for a long time as the snow began to fall harder, sticking to my eyelashes. A group of tourists bumped into me, apologizing as they rushed to take a photo with the John Harvard statue. They did not see the tears freezing on my cheeks. They did not see the top student of the class of 2024, breaking into pieces. I looked at the graduation cap in my hand, the tassel gold and crimson, heavy with tradition and promise. I walked over to a rusted metal trash can, overflowing with empty coffee cups and discarded flyers, with a calm that scared me. I dropped the cap into the garbage. It landed on top of a half-eaten bagel. "Goodbye." "Maya," I whispered, but I tucked the diploma inside my coat, closest to my heart. That was my weapon, and I never leave a weapon behind. 12 hours later, I was standing outside the wrought iron gates of my parents' estate in Atlanta. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree, music thumping so loud I could feel the bass in the pavement. I pressed the buzzer, looking into the security camera, expecting the gate to swing open. Instead, a voice crackled through the intercom service. "Entrance is around back kitchen. Staff does not use the front gate." I stared at the camera. Incredible, I had lived in this house for 18 years, and the new security guard hired by my brother-in-law assumed I was the help because of my skin color and my lack of a designer handbag. Open the gate. I said, my voice low and dangerous. It is Maya Vance. The buzzer buzzed reluctantly and the gates groaned open. I walked up the long driveway, dragging my suitcase through the perfectly manicured gravel luxury cars lined the drive, Bentley's Porsches, and a few Teslas owned by the new tech crowd Declan was trying to impress. Inside the foyer was a wall of noise. Waitstaff in white tuxedos circulated with trays of caviar. My sister Serena was posing for a photographer near the grand staircase, wearing a dress that cost more than my entire student loan debt. She looked beautiful and completely hollow. She spotted me, and her smile faltered, not out of guilt, but out of annoyance. "Oh, look who finally showed up," she called out, her voice carrying over the jazz music. "Did you take the bus from the airport, or did you hitchhike?" I ignored her, scanning the room for Declan. The man of the hour, the man my father claimed was the savior of the Vance legacy. I found him near the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch, swirling it like he had seen villains do in movies. Declan was the definition of mediocre, average height, thinning hair, and a confidence that far outstripped his ability. He was a white man who had married into a wealthy black family and somehow convinced my parents that he was the one doing us a favor. "Well, well," the scholar returns. Declan smirked, stepping away from a group of investors to block my path. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my wind-blown hair and my simple wool coat. "You look rough. Maya, honestly, you could learn a thing or two from Serena. Appearance is an asset, you know. Nobody wants to invest in a computer with legs. You are smart, sure, but you are not exactly the face of a brand, are you?" I felt the heat rise up my neck, not from embarrassment, but from rage. I walked past him towards the buffet table where he had set up a display of iPads showing the real-time analytics of his new app, PetFit. The screen showed a graph with a line shooting straight up. User growth, exploding vertical engagement through the roof. My father was standing next to the display, pointing at it, proudly telling anyone who would listen, "Look at those numbers. My son-in-law is a genius." I stepped closer, my eyes narrowing. I had spent the last 4 years analyzing distressed assets and corporate fraud. I knew what real growth looked like, and I knew what a lie looked like. I tapped the screen, opening the developer console, hidden in the corner of the app interface. Mere mortals would not know how to access it. But I was not a mere mortal. I was a shark in training. "What are you doing? Do not touch that!" Declan snapped, lunging forward. But he was too late. I scrolled through the user logs. User 4590. Bot user 4591 bot. IP addresses from a click farm in Bangladesh, repeated thousands of times over. There were not 50,000 active users. There were maybe 300 actual people and 49,000 robots paid to click. "You are faking the numbers," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, quiet enough that only the family could hear, but loud enough to stop Declan in his tracks. "This is a Ponzi scheme. Declan, you are inflating the user base to secure the Series A funding that is federal fraud." I turned to my father, expecting him to be horrified, expecting him to thank me for saving him from prison. "Dad, look at this. He is lying to you. He is going to bankrupt us." My father looked at the screen, then at Declan, then at me. His face turned purple, but not at the white man stealing his money. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You just cannot stand it, can you?" my father hissed, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. "You cannot stand that a white man is doing more for this family in 1 year than you have done in your entire miserable life. You are jealous, Maya. You are a jealous, bitter girl who wants to ruin everyone else. Is happiness because no one wants you. Declan is a visionary. Everyone puffs up the numbers a little bit in the beginning. It is called marketing, something you would know nothing about. Now get upstairs and stay there until the guests leave. Or better yet, Get out. I do not want your bad energy poisoning this deal. I looked at my mother. She was busy feeding Winston the corgi a piece of smoked salmon, pretending she did not hear her husband banishing her daughter. I looked at Serena, who was checking her reflection in her phone screen, indifferent to the war happening 3 feet away, and finally I looked at Declan. He was smirking again, that arrogant, secure smile of a man who knows he is protected by privilege and the blindness of others. Go on, Maya, he whispered, leaning in close, so only I could hear. Take your little degree and go play. Office somewhere else. The grown-ups are talking business. At that moment, something snapped inside me. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a vault door closing on my heart. I realized then that I could not save them. I did not want to save them. They were not my family. They were my first acquisition target. I pulled my arm from my father's grip and smoothed out my coat. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just memorized the look of fear in Declan, his eyes when I had opened that console. Because I knew one day I would make that fear permanent. Understood. I said simply, I will leave. But remember this night, Dad. Remember you chose the fraud over the truth. Because when I come back, I am not coming for dinner. I am coming for the deed. To this house turned on my heel and walked out into the cold Atlanta night, leaving the warmth, the lies, and the name. Maya Vance, behind, forever. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, echoing through the silence of the house like a funeral toll outside. The windows, a rare Atlanta blizzard, was raging, burying the world in white. But inside my father, Reginald's study, the air was suffocatingly hot and heavy with the smell of expensive cognac and betrayal. I stood before the massive mahogany desk, clutching the manila folder that contained the evidence of our ruin. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the sheer adrenaline of what I was about to do. My father sat in his high-backed leather chair, looking at me with the same expression he used when he found a scratch on his Bentley, disappointed and annoyed. My mother. Camille stood by the window, staring out into the darkness, refusing to meet my eyes. She was twisting her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she had developed whenever my father was in a mood tonight. His mood was lethal. Dad, please, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Just look at the numbers. I placed the folder on the pristine surface of his desk, sliding it toward him. Declan is not just inflating user. Just counts he is using new investor money to pay off the old ones. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme. Look at page 4. The liquidity ratio is negative. When this crashes, and it will crash, the SEC will come for everything. They will take the vineyard. They will take this house. They will take your pension. My father did not even open the folder. He simply picked up his glass of cognac, swirled the amber liquid, and took a slow, deliberate sip. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were cold enough to freeze hell. You are pathetic, Maya, he said softly, which was far more terrifying than his shouting. You come into my house, disrupt my celebration, and now you slander the man who is trying to save this family, his legacy, because you are jealous. He is not saving us. I stepped forward, desperate to make him see reason. He is drowning us. Mom, say something. You saw the fake accounts on the screen. You know I am right. My mother finally turned from the window. Her face was a mask of perfect makeup, but her eyes were empty. Just stop it, Maya, she whispered. Do not ruin this for your sister. Declan is family. You should be supporting him, not trying to tear him down with your little spreadsheets. Support him! My father roared suddenly, standing up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He slammed his hand down on the desk, making the crystal decanter jump. Support a man who has done more for us in a year than you have done in your entire life, you ungrateful child. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. I held my ground, refusing to shrink back as I had done so many times as a child, But then he did something he had never done before. He raised his hand, and before I could flinch, his palm connected with my cheek. Crack! The sound was louder than the storm outside. My head snapped to the side, the force of the blow knocking me off balance. I tasted copper in my mouth. My cheek burned as if he had branded me. I slowly turned my head back to face him, shock vibrating through every nerve in my body. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but she did not move toward me. She did not tell him to stop. She just stood there watching. Silence stretched between us, thick and poisonous. My father was breathing heavily, his face flushed, but there was no regret in his eyes, only contempt. "You want to be part of this family?" he spat, adjusting his cufflinks. "Then earn it." He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the wood until it rested next to the folder. I had brought Declan, needs a guarantor for a bridge loan, $5 million. The bank will not take his signature alone because his assets are tied up, but they will take yours with that Ivy League credit rating. You are so proud of. I looked down at the paper. It was a loan guarantee, putting me on the hook for millions of dollars debt that I knew Declan could never repay. It was a death warrant for my financial future, a chain that would drag me to the bottom of the ocean along with them. "Sign it," my father commanded. "Prove you are a Vance. Prove you are loyal. And if I do not," I asked, my voice quiet, dangerously calm. "Then you are no daughter of mine," he sneered, leaning over the desk. "You leave tonight, right now. No coat, no car, no money. You are dead to us. You will walk out into that snow, and you will never come back." I looked at the paper. Then, I looked at my mother. "Is this what you want?" I asked her. "Just sign it, Maya," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Do not be difficult. Just do what your father says, and we can all go to sleep." I nodded slowly, as if accepting my fate. I reached into my tote bag. "I will sign something," I said. A smug smile spread across my father's face. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken me, just like he broke my spirit when I was a child. But he was wrong. I pulled out a document I had drafted in the university law library 3 days ago. It was not a loan guarantee. It was a legal affidavit of emancipation and disownment, formally severing all legal and familial ties. I placed it on top of his loan paper. I picked up his heavy gold fountain pen, the one he used to sign checks for my sister's shopping sprees, and I uncapped it. I signed my name, not as a question but as a declaration. The nib scratched against the paper, a sound of finality. "There," I said, capping the pen and sliding the document toward him. "I am not signing your loan. I am signing my resignation as your scapegoat. You do not have a daughter named Maya anymore. She died the moment you hit her." My father looked down at the document, reading the bold header. His face went from red to a ghostly pale white. Before he could speak, I turned around and walked toward the heavy oak doors. "Where do you think you are going?" he screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "It is 10 degrees below zero out there. You will freeze to death." I stopped with my hand on the brass doorknob and looked back at them, one last time. The two people who were supposed to protect me, standing in their fortress of lies. "Would rather freeze to death out there than burn in this hell with you," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. I opened the door and the wind hit me like a physical blow, screaming into the hallway, bringing a flurry of snow with it. I stepped out into the night, dragging my suitcase behind me, the cold bit through my thin blouse instantly numbing my skin. But inside I felt a fire igniting a cold blue flame of determination. I walked down the long driveway, the snow swirling around me, erasing my footprints as soon as I made them. I did not look back at the warm, glowing windows of the mansion. I did not look back at the life I was leaving behind. As I reached the iron gates, I paused, my hand gripping the cold metal bars. The wind howled around me, tearing at my clothes, but I stood tall for the first time in my life. I was free. Keep the house. Reginald, I whispered into the storm. Let the wind carry my words back to him. Keep the lies. Keep the debt. Keep your golden child. Because the next time I walk through these gates, I will not be knocking, asking for permission to enter. I will be holding the master key, and I will own everything you see. I pushed the gates open and walked into the darkness, leaving Maya Vance behind in the snow and taking my first step as Vesper St. Clair into a future that would be written in their blood and my ink. 10 years can change the geography of a coastline, and it can certainly change the landscape of a human soul. Standing in my corner office on the 55th floor of the One World Trade Center, looking down at the ant, like cars crawling through Manhattan, I hardly recognized the woman, reflected in the floor-to-ceiling glass. She was not Maya Vance anymore. Maya was a ghost, a memory buried under a decade of relentless ambition and cold, hard cash. The woman in the reflection was Vesper St. Clair. I smoothed the lapel of my cream-colored cashmere blazer. It was a piece from the row, costing more than the entire wardrobe I had owned in college. There were no logos, no flashy branding, just the quiet, undeniable weight of extreme wealth. My hair, once worn in practical braids, was now a sleek silk press cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed a face which had forgotten how to smile. Out of politeness, I only smiled now when I had won. The intercom on my desk buzzed soft and discreet. Ms. St. Clair, Mr. Sterling is here for the acquisition meeting. Shall I send him in? Send him in, I said, my voice dropping an octave lower than it used to be, perfectly calibrated to command attention. The double glass doors opened and Julian Sterling, the CEO of Maison Sterling, a failing luxury fashion house, strode in. He was a man used to getting his way, handsome in a rugged, careless sort of way, wearing a suit that was too tight and an expression that was too confident for a man on the brink of bankruptcy. He stopped in front of my desk, expecting me to stand to greet him. I remained seated, my fingers interlaced, resting on the cool marble surface. Vesper, he said, leaning forward, creating a false sense of intimacy. I am so glad we could finally meet face to face. My lawyers told me you are a tough nut to crack, but I know once you hear the vision for the spring collection, you will understand why we need this bridge loan. I did not blink. I did not nod. I simply tapped the iPad in front of me, waking the screen. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, I said, not gesturing to the chair, simply issuing a command. He blinked, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he pulled out the chair and sat down, looking slightly less comfortable. Well, like I was saying, the brand is just going through a temporary liquidity crunch. We have a legacy. You have $18 million in toxic debt. I cut him off, my voice devoid of emotion. You have a supply chain that has not been audited since 2015, and you have been using company funds to lease a villa in Lake Como for your mistress, while your seamstresses in Italy have not been paid in 3 months. Julian turned a shade of pale gray that clashed with his expensive tan. Excuse me, who told you that those are private? There is no such thing as private when you are asking for my money. I stood up then, walking slowly around the desk. The click of my Louboutin heels on the hardwood floor sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. I walked behind him, sensing his muscles tense up like a prey animal, realizing the predator is in the room. I am not here to give you a bridge loan, Julian, I said, stopping right behind his ear. I am here to inform you that as of 9 a.m. this morning, St. Clair Capital has purchased the majority of your outstanding debt from your creditors. That makes me your owner, not your partner. He spun around in his chair, his face twisting into a sneer. You cannot do that. I am the creative director. I am the soul of this company. You are just some vulture with a calculator. You do not understand art. I understand leverage, I said, walking back to my seat and leaning against the edge of the desk, looking down at him. And right now you have none. I am triggering the default clause in your debt agreement, effective immediately. The board has been dissolved, and as the new majority stakeholder, I am making my first executive decision. I picked up a single piece of paper from my desk, and let it flutter down onto his lap. "You are fired, Julian. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk. Do not take the stapler. It belongs to me now." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but he saw something in my eyes that stopped him from screaming. It was the absolute terrifying certainty that I would destroy him if he said another word. He stood up, grabbing the paper, his hands shaking, and stormed out of the office, slamming the glass door behind him. I did not flinch. I did not feel a rush of adrenaline or a pang of guilt. I just felt the cold satisfaction of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. Business was simple. Numbers were simple, people were the variable, and I had learned how to remove the variable. My assistant Elena walked in, a moment later holding a fresh espresso and a thick black dossier. She was a sharp young woman who knew better than to speak unless spoken to, but today she looked hesitant. "Ms. St. Clair, the acquisition is complete. Trading has been suspended on Maison Sterling just as you requested." She placed the coffee on the coaster perfectly aligned with the corner of the desk. "But there is something else. A new file came across the distressed asset desk this morning. Usually, I would filter it out because it is below our usual threshold. But the names caught my attention. I took a sip of the espresso, the bitter dark roast grounding me. "What names?" She placed the black folder in front of me, her fingers lingering on the cover for a second before she pulled away. "It is a family-owned conglomerate based in Atlanta. They are hemorrhaging money looking for an angel investor to save them from a federal indictment and foreclosure." I froze, the cup hovering halfway to my lips. Atlanta. The word hung in the air, heavy with the scent of magnolias and old betrayals. I slowly lowered the cup and reached for the folder, my manicured nails tapping against the dark cardboard. "What is the name of the firm?" I asked. Though I think deep down in the marrow of my bones I already knew the answer. "Vance Declan Enterprises," Elena said softly. "They are leveraged to the hilt. Apparently the CEO has been faking growth numbers for a decade, and the founders put up their personal estate as collateral." I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a photograph clipped to the summary sheet. It was a picture of Declan, older, fatter, his hairline receding, but still wearing that same arrogant smirk. Next to him was a photo of my parents, looking tired and desperate, their eyes pleading with the camera. And there was Serena looking like a faded copy of her former self, heavily filtered, but unable to hide the cracks. A smile slowly spread across my face, not the polite smile I used for business meetings, but a genuine, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. It was the smile of a wolf that had just found a wounded deer in the snow. "They are looking for an angel investor," I whispered, running my thumb over Declan's face. "Yes, ma'am," Elena said, pulling out her tablet. "Should I reject it? Tell them we are not interested in small-cap disputes." "No," I said, closing the folder with a soft thud. "Do not reject it. Set up a meeting. Tell them the St. Clair Fund is interested in a complete acquisition. Tell them we specialize in saving family legacies." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that lay at my feet. 10 years ago, they threw me out into the cold because I was worthless today. I was going to buy their lives with the pocket change from my last deal. "Book the jet." "Elena," I said, staring at my reflection in the glass, and seeing the ghost of Maya Vance standing behind me, nodding in approval. "We are going to Atlanta. It is time for a family reunion." The atmosphere inside the Vance estate in Atlanta had shifted from old money quiet to the desperate, frantic silence of a sinking ship. The air conditioning had been turned off to save on the electric bill, making the humid Georgia heat cling to the walls like a second skin. Usually the driveway would be filled with luxury SUVs, but today it was empty except for a white unmarked van from a local auction house driving away with 3 generations of antique furniture. Inside the living room, Serena was pacing back and forth wearing a silk robe that had seen better days. Her phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising into a screech that made my father flinch. "Do not tell me. It is declined." "Run it again," she screamed at some unfortunate customer service representative. "It is a platinum Amex. There is no limit. You people are incompetent. Do you know who I am? I am Serena Vance. I have 2 million followers." She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the screen in disbelief as the line went dead. She threw the device onto the sofa where it bounced harmlessly against the cushions. "They cut me off," she whispered, turning to my mother, her eyes wide with panic. "Mom? They cut off the platinum card. I was supposed to go to the dermatologist today. My skin is a disaster from all this stress. How am I supposed to be the face of this family if I look like a peasant?" My mother Camille was sitting in a high-backed armchair that was now the only piece of furniture left in the corner. She looked aged 10 years. In the last 10 months, her hands were shaking as she poured tea from a silver pot that she had surprisingly managed to hide from the debt collectors. "Serena, please keep your voice down," she hissed, looking toward the closed doors of Declan's office. "Your father is on the phone with the lawyers again. The SEC is threatening to freeze the remaining liquid assets if we do not post bail for the investigation." "I do not care about the SEC," Serena yelled, kicking a pile of unpaid bills that lay on the floor like fallen leaves. "I care that I cannot buy moisturizer. I care that my friends are asking why I have not posted a vacation photo in 6 months. We look poor. Mom, and looking poor is worse than being poor." Meanwhile, behind the heavy oak doors of the study, Declan was drowning not in water, but in paperwork and cheap whiskey. His startup PetFit, once the darling of the Atlanta tech scene, was now a carcass being picked apart by vultures. Lawsuits were piling up like snowdrifts. Former employees were suing for unpaid wages, investors were suing for fraud, and the federal government was asking uncomfortable questions about where exactly the Series A funding had disappeared to. Declan slammed his fist onto the desk, making the empty bottle rattle. He looked terrible. His face was puffy from alcohol and lack of sleep, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He was a man who had believed his own lie for so long that the truth felt like a personal attack. "It is a conspiracy," he muttered to himself, pouring the last drops of whiskey into a stained glass. "They are all against me because I am a disruptor, because I am a white man shaking up their little black elite circle. They want to see me fail." He typed furiously on his laptop, sending out another batch of desperate emails to venture capital firms in New York, in Silicon Valley, and London. Anyone who had deep pockets and did not know his reputation yet. Subject line: exclusive opportunity. Pre-IPO investment. Begging disguised as benevolence. Suddenly the heavy doors swung open and my father Reginald walked in. Looking defeated. He had just sold his beloved Steinway piano for a fraction of its value just to pay the retainer for their criminal defense attorney. "Declan, we need to talk," Reginald said, his voice weary. "We cannot keep this up. The bank called again. They are initiating foreclosure proceedings on the house next week. If we do not come up with $500,000 by Friday, we are going to be on the street." Declan spun around, in his chair, his eyes manic. "Do not come in here with that negativity." "Reginald, I am working. I am close to a breakthrough. I can feel it." "You have been saying that for a year," my father snapped, losing his patience. "There is no breakthrough. The app is dead, the users are fake, and the money is gone. We need to face reality. We need to declare bankruptcy and beg the court for mercy." "Never," Declan screamed, standing up so fast his chair tipped over. "I will never admit defeat to those losers, especially not after what Maya said that night. I will not let that little witch be right. I am a visionary." Just as the argument reached a fever pitch, a sound cut through the tension. A sharp, melodic ping from Declan's laptop. It was not the sound of a rejection email. It was the priority notification sound. he had set for high-value contacts. The room went silent. Declan froze, his chest heaving. He slowly turned back to the screen, his hand hovering over the trackpad. "Who is it?" my father asked, stepping closer. Hope, warring with skepticism in his eyes. Declan clicked the email, his eyes scanning the text rapidly, his mouth slowly curving into a smile that was terrifying in its delusion. He let out a low laugh that built into a cackle. "Look at this," he whispered, pointing at the screen. "Look at this. Reginald, you wanted a breakthrough. Here is your miracle." He turned the laptop around so my father could see the sender. ID was simple, elegant, and dripped with money. St. Clair Capital. My father squinted, reading the subject line. Investment inquiry, strategic partnership, opportunity. Declan read the email aloud, his voice trembling with excitement. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Vance and Mr. Declan Miller, we have been following the trajectory of your family enterprise, and we believe there is significant undervalued potential in your brand. St. Clair Capital specializes in distressed assets with high turnaround capability. We are prepared to offer an immediate liquidity injection of $50 million pending a character audit and a face-to-face meeting in our New York headquarters, signed Vesper St. Clair, CEO. $50 million. My father breathed, the number hanging in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "Who is Vesper St. Clair?" "Who cares who she is?" Declan shouted, grabbing my father by the shoulders and shaking him. "She is a billionaire. That is who she is." St. Clair Capital is a vulture fund, but they are the biggest in the game. If they are interested, it means I was right all along. He began to pace the room, his arrogance inflating instantly, erasing months of fear and failure. "See, Reginald. I told you," he pointed a finger at my father, "is chest. These New York types, they understand genius. They look past the bad press and the fake lawsuits. They see the raw talent." He ran to the door and threw it open, shouting into the living room. "Serena Camille, pack your bags. We are going to New York. We are rich again." Serena looked up from the sofa, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Really? Declan, are you serious? Can I get my card back?" "Better." Declan laughed, striding into the room like a conquering king. "You can buy the whole store. St. Clair Capital just offered us $50 million. $50 million. My mother let out a sob of relief, clutching her chest. "Oh, thank God, I knew it. I knew we were being tested, and we passed." Declan poured himself a glass of water, pretending it was champagne, raising it to the ceiling. "I told you all," he said, his eyes gleaming with a toxic mix of narcissism and vindication. "They tried to bury me. They tried to say I was a fraud. But real money knows real talent. St. Clair Capital sees me for what I am, a titan." He looked at his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his rumpled collar, oblivious to the fact that he was not looking at a savior. He was looking at the bait in a trap designed specifically for his ego, oblivious to the fact that Vesper St. Clair was not a stranger, and that $50 million was not a gift. It was the price tag for his destruction. "Pack the best clothes you have left," Declan ordered. "We need to look like we do not need the money. We need to walk into that office and show this Vesper woman that she is lucky to be in business with the Vance family." As they scrambled to pack their bags, dreaming of private jets and renewed status, none of them noticed the cold efficiency of the email. None of them wondered why a billionaire in New York would be interested in a failing dog fitness app in Atlanta, and none of them remembered the girl they had thrown out into the snow 10 years ago. The girl who had vowed to return with the master key. They were walking willingly into the lion, is den, convinced they were the kings of the jungle. The elevator ride to the 55th floor of the World Trade Center takes exactly 60 seconds. But watching my family on the security monitor on my desk, it must have felt like a lifetime for them. I watched them adjust their clothes in the polished metal reflection of the elevator doors. Declan was wiping sweat from his forehead, checking his watch every 5 seconds. My mother Camille was reapplying lipstick, that was a shade too bright for a business meeting, trying to mask the tremors in her hands, and Serena was taking a selfie naturally, posing with a duck face captioning it. Probably something about big business moves, while her bank account was currently overdrawn by $4,000. They looked small from this angle, stripped of the bravado they displayed in Atlanta, stripped of the power they held over me. When I was 22, up here in the clouds, they were just desperate people hoping for a miracle, and I was the god they were coming to pray to. I spun my chair around, facing the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River. The sun was setting, casting a blinding golden glare against the glass, turning my silhouette into a dark, imposing shadow. I did not want them to see my face clearly. Not yet. I wanted them to feel my presence before they saw my eyes. The intercom buzzed. "Miss St. Clair, the Vance party is here. Send them in." I commanded, my voice low and practiced, devoid of the southern softness I had worked years to erase. The heavy glass doors hissed open and the sound of footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Hesitant at first, then gaining confidence as they stepped onto the plush Persian rug that cost more than their entire mortgage. "Mrs. St. Clair," Declan called out, his voice pitching slightly too high. "I cannot tell you what an honor this is. I am Declan Miller, CEO of Vance Declan Enterprises, and this is my wife, Serena, and my in-laws, Reginald and Camille Vance." I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment, watching their reflections in the glass window, waiting until the air in the room became thin with tension. Then slowly, deliberately, I swiveled my chair around. I was wearing a structured black suit from Schiaparelli, sharp shoulders that looked like armor, and dark, oversized sunglasses that hid the shape of my eyes. My hair was different. My nose was different, thanks to a very talented surgeon in Zurich, and my posture was that of a queen on her throne, not a cowering student. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the 4 uncomfortable leather chairs arranged in a semicircle before my massive desk. I did not stand. I did not offer a handshake. They sat down, shuffling nervously. Declan took the center seat, naturally spreading his legs in a display of dominance that looked pathetic. "In this setting, Ms. St. Clair." Declan began, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "I know you are a busy woman, so I will get straight to the point. Our company is on the verge of a massive breakout. We have the technology, we have the brand legacy. All we need is a partner with vision." I picked up the file on my desk, the one labeled with their financial ruin, and dropped it back down with a heavy thud. "I am not interested in your vision, Mr. Miller," I said, my voice cool and detached. "I am interested in your liabilities. I see here, you are facing a federal inquiry regarding your user data, and your personal assets are leveraged to 90%. Declan choked slightly, his face turning a blotchy red. "Well, that is just a misunderstanding. Standard startup growing pains. The SEC is just overzealous with disruptors like us." "Is that so?" I asked, turning my head slightly toward my mother, Camille, who was staring at me with a strange intensity. Not of recognition, but of awe. "And you, Mrs. Vance," I said, addressing her directly. "For the first time in a decade, I see your name is on the deed to the property being used as collateral. Are you prepared to lose your home if this vision fails?" My mother sat up straighter, smoothing her skirt. "No, Ms. St. Clair. We believe in Declan. He is family, and family supports each other. We make sacrifices for greatness." Sacrifices. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Interesting. I heard you had another daughter once. Was she not willing to sacrifice for this greatness?" The room went dead silent. Serena looked at her nails. Reginald coughed into his hand. And Declan looked annoyed that I had brought up a sore subject. My mother sighed, a sound of long suffering, performative grief. "Oh, you mean Maya." She shook her head. a sad smile playing on her lips. She was troubled. Ms. St. Clair always was. She did not have the drive or the loyalty that Declan has. She abandoned us years ago, ran off and got into drugs or something terrible. We tried to help her. We really did. But some people are just born broken. My father nodded, chiming in exactly. She was a waste of potential. Ungrateful, really. We gave her everything and she threw it back in our faces, honestly. Looking at you sitting there with such command, such elegance. I wish our eldest had been even half the woman you are, but she was useless. Dead to us, really. Even before she left. I felt a sharp physical pain in my chest, as if a rib had snapped. But my face remained an unmoving mask of marble. Useless, broken, dead to us. The words echoed in my mind, fueling the fire that had kept me warm for 10 years. They were rewriting history right in front of me, painting themselves as the victims and me as the villain. I see, I said slowly, adjusting my sunglasses, pushing them up the bridge of my nose. Well, it is good to know you value loyalty above all else, because the St. Clair Fund operates on absolute loyalty. I opened the leather folder in front of me and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the desk toward Declan. Here is the offer, I said, watching their eyes widen as they saw the number printed at the bottom. $50 million in liquid capital to clear your debts, settle the lawsuits and rebrand the company. Declan gasped, audible and wet. 50 million. Oh my God, this is incredible. Ms. St. Clair, you will not regret this. Wait. I held up a hand, silencing him. Not so fast. There is a condition. Anything, Declan said, practically vibrating in his chair. Anything you want. This is not a standard investment, I explained, leaning back and crossing my legs. This is a partnership based on character. I do not invest in companies. Mr. Miller, I invest in people. And before I sign that check, I need to know exactly who you are. I want full access. I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper. I want 1 week to audit not just your books but your lives. I want to see how you live, how you spend, how you treat your staff, and how you treat each other. You will stay here in New York, at a hotel of my choosing, and I will observe you. If I see one lie, one ethical breach, or one moment of weakness, the deal is off, and I let the bank foreclose on your home immediately. Declan laughed, a nervous, arrogant sound that grated on my nerves. Is that it? A character audit? Miss St. Clair, we are upstanding citizens. We are the pillars of our community in Atlanta. We have nothing to hide. My father nodded eagerly. We are a good Christian family. Ms. St. Clair, you will find nothing but love and integrity among us. I smiled then, a thin, predatory smile that barely lifted the corners of my mouth. Excellent, I said, tapping the intercom. Elena, please show our guest to the door and send the contract to Mr. Miller, is lawyer in the morning. As they stood up, bowing and scraping, thanking me profusely for saving their lives, I watched them file out of the office like sheep heading to the slaughter. Just as my mother reached the door, she turned back, looking at me one last time. You know, she said, her voice soft, you really do remind me of someone. I just cannot place it. You have a very familiar spirit. I lowered my sunglasses just an inch, peering over the rim so she could see my eyes for a fraction of a second. Those same dark eyes she had looked into for 22 years before she erased me. I get that a lot. Mrs. Vance, I said quietly, now have a wonderful evening. The door clicked shut, and I was alone again in the silence of my empire. I walked to the window and looked down at the streets below where my family was likely hugging each other, celebrating their victory, believing they had just conned a billionaire. They had no idea that the character audit had already begun, and they had no idea that the woman they just called useless was holding the pen that would write the final chapter of their lives. Let the game begin, I whispered to the reflection in the glass, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt something akin to joy. It was dark, it was twisted, but it was mine. The following morning, I handed Serena a challenge that was disguised as a gift. I told her that the St. Clair Fund was hosting an intimate cocktail hour for our top-tier partners at a private gallery in Chelsea, and I wanted her to curate the event. I told her it was a test of her aesthetic judgment, a chance to prove that the Vance family had the sophistication required to mingle with old money New York. Serena took the bait hook, line, and sinker. She practically snatched the corporate credit card from my hand, her eyes gleaming with the prospect of spending someone else's money. She spent the next 3 days terrorizing the event planners I had assigned to her, demanding out-of-season flowers and shouting at Michelin star chefs about menu pairings she did not understand. I did not intervene. I simply watched the security feed from my office, observing her abuse my staff. She called the florist an idiot for suggesting hydrangeas. She told the lighting technician that he was incompetent because he could not make the room look like a nightclub, and she threatened to fire the sommelier 3 times in 1 hour. On the night of the event, I arrived 15 minutes late by design. I wanted the room to be full. I wanted the elite of Manhattan to have a good look at Serena Vance before I arrived. I walked into the gallery wearing a structural white jumpsuit that looked simple but cost more than a luxury sedan. The room was buzzing, but the energy was wrong. It was frantic, loud, and smelled overpowering. Serena had filled the space with Casablanca lilies, thousands of them. The scent was so thick it tasted like a funeral parlor combined with the heavy bass of the DJ she had hired. The atmosphere was not elegant. It was aggressive. I spotted Serena near the bar. She was wearing a gold sequined dress that caught every light in the room, making her look like a disco ball. She was snapping her fingers at a waiter, pointing at an empty glass on a nearby table. "Hey, you!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the conversation. "Clean this up. What am I paying you for?" The waiter, a young man named Elias, who was working his way through law school, froze, his face flushing with embarrassment. The guests around them fell silent, looking at Serena with a mixture of shock and disdain. In this world, you did not yell at staff. You treated them with invisible grace, because true power does not need to be loud. I glided across the room, my movements fluid and silent, catching the eye of the waiter. I gave him a subtle nod, letting him know he was safe. Then I stepped into Serena's personal space. "Serena?" I said, my voice low and smooth like velvet dragged over gravel. She spun around, a manic smile plastered on her face. "Vesper, look at this place, isn't it amazing? I went with the gold theme. It screams wealth, doesn't it?" "It screams something," I said, looking around at the garish display. "But wealth is not the word I would use." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean? Look at the flowers. Look at the champagne." I ordered the most expensive bottles on the list. I walked over to the bar and picked up the bottle she had selected. It was a heavy, full-bodied Cabernet Sauvignon vintage 1995. "You ordered a heavy red wine to pair with raw oysters and scallop ceviche," I said, lifting the bottle so the light caught the label. "You are forcing your guests to drink something that will make the delicate seafood taste like metal and iodine. It is not just a bad choice, Serena, it is culinary violence." Serena laughed nervously, looking around for support, but finding none. "Oh, who cares about the pairing? It costs $500 a bottle. They should be grateful." "And the lilies." I continued, gesturing to the overwhelming floral arrangements. "You chose the most fragrant flower in existence for a room where people are eating. The scent clashes with the food and triggers allergies. Half of my board members are currently holding their breath." Serena crossed her arms, her defense mechanism kicking in. "Well, I like them. They are big and dramatic, just like me." "You are treating this event like a music video shoot," I said, stepping closer until I was inches from her face. "But this is a business gathering. These people do not want drama. They want comfort. They want discretion, and they want service that is invisible, not a host who snaps her fingers at the help." I turned to Elias, the waiter, and spoke loud enough for the circle of guests to hear. "Elias, Please remove the lilies from the main floor and replace them with the white orchids from the back room, and please open the cases of Sancerre I had delivered earlier. The crisp acidity will actually complement the oysters, yes, Ms. St. Clair, Elias said, a look of relief washing over his face. He moved instantly, respecting my authority because I had earned it, not demanded it. Serena looked furious, her chest heaving. You are embarrassing me, she hissed, grabbing my arm. You gave me this job, you said I was in charge. I pulled my arm away, my touch burning cold against her skin. I gave you a chance to show me who you are. Serena, and you did exactly that. You showed me that you value price tags over quality and dominance over service. You think expensive things make you look important, but you are wearing that dress like a costume. The room was deadly silent. Now the DJ had lowered the music, sensing the shift in power. The guests were pretending to look away, but they were listening to every word. You treated my staff like servants, I said, my voice hard and final. But the only person acting like a servant tonight is you, serving your own ego. Serena, his eyes filled with tears of rage. I am a Vance, she sputtered. I have, followers. People look up to me. I leaned in close, delivering the final blow. So only she and the nearest billionaires could hear. You have an audience. Serena, not a reputation. There is a difference. You can buy the wine, you can buy the dress, and you can certainly buy the flowers with my credit card. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. But Ms. Vance, money cannot buy class. And right now, you are the poorest person in this room. I turned my back on her, signaling for the DJ to switch to a smooth jazz playlist, leaving her standing there in her gold dress, surrounded by the wrong flowers and the wrong wine, looking small and tacky against the backdrop of true elegance. I walked toward my key investors who greeted me with warm handshakes and knowing nods, silently, thanking me for saving the evening from the disaster my sister had created. As I sipped a glass of the Sancerre, perfectly chilled and crisp, I watched Serena run to the bathroom, clutching her phone presumably, to cry to her followers about how mean I was. She did not understand that she had just failed the first test of the character audit, and she had handed me the first weapon I would use to dismantle her self-esteem piece by garish piece. The restaurant was called Le Jardin, and getting a reservation usually required a blood sacrifice or a last name that appeared on buildings. But when you are Vesper St. Clair, they do not just find you a table, they build you one. I sat in the private alcove surrounded by velvet curtains and the soft clink of silver against bone china, watching Declan scan the wine list with the desperate intensity of a man trying to prove he belongs. He was trying so hard it was almost painful to watch. He had slicked his hair back with too much gel, and his cologne, a heavy musk that smelled like desperation and pine, was warring with the delicate scent of the white truffles on the table. He ordered a bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1996, without asking me, looking at the sommelier with a smug expression as if expecting applause for knowing the vintage. Excellent choice, sir. The sommelier set his face a mask of professional neutrality, though I saw the slight twitch in his eye as Declan mispronounced the name of the vineyard. Declan leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms as if he owned the place well. Vesper, I hope you do not mind me calling you Vesper, do you? I feel like we have moved past the formalities. I swirled my water, watching the light catch the diamond bracelet on my wrist. Please, Declan, I said, my voice smooth and encouraging. I prefer it. We are partners after all. Or at least we hope to be. His eyes lit up, and he took a large gulp of the wine the sommelier had just poured, not bothering to let it breathe. Partners, he repeated, savoring the word exactly. That is what I have been trying to tell Reginald and Camille for years. They need vision. They need a modern touch. But you know how they are. How are they? I asked, tilting my head slightly, the movement causing the emerald earrings I wore to flash in the candlelight. Tell me, Declan. I want to understand the family dynamic before I invest $50 million into it. Declan laughed, a short barking sound that made a couple at the next table glance over. He leaned in his elbows on the table, invading my personal space. Well, let us just be honest here, Vesper. You are a woman of the world. You see things clearly. The Vances are wonderful people, really. They are, but they are chaotic. It is a cultural thing, I suppose. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline in my gut. My hand drifted under the table, finding the small, sleek recording device I had taped to the underside of the mahogany surface earlier that afternoon. I pressed the button, feeling the tiny vibration confirming it was live. Cultural, I repeated, keeping my face perfectly neutral. How so? Declan lowered his voice, glancing around as if sharing a state-secret look. I love my wife and her parents, but let us be real. I am the only white man in the room at our family meetings, and sometimes I feel like I am the only one bringing any logic to the table. They are so emotional, so volatile, always screaming and crying about loyalty and legacy, but they do not understand structure. I am the one who brings order to their chaos. I am the anchor without me. That whole family would have floated away into bankruptcy years ago. I am basically their savior. I took a slow sip of my wine, hiding the sneer that was threatening to break through my composure. So you feel you are carrying the weight of the Vance family on your shoulders. Carrying it, dragging it, saving it, Declan said, puffing out his chest. Honestly, it is exhausting being the only adult in the room. Sometimes I look at Reginald, and I think, how did you acquire all this wealth without a brain in your head? It must have been luck. Pure, dumb luck. But me, I have strategy. He reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. I did not pull away, though my skin crawled at his touch. I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to hang himself completely. And Serena, I asked softly, surely she helps. She seems very passionate about the brand. Declan snorted, rolling his eyes, looking at his wine glass with sudden fascination. Serena was great. Once you know, back when we first met, she was a firecracker, beautiful, tight, ambitious. But now he shrugged, dismissing his wife of 10 years with a wave of his hand. Now she is just baggage. She has let herself go, Vesper. She is obsessed with social media because she has nothing else going on. She is aging, and she is not doing it gracefully. She has become bitter, and honestly, a little heavy, if you know what I mean. He looked at me, his eyes traveling down to the neckline of my emerald silk dress, lingering there, with a hunger that made me want to shower in bleach. You, on the other hand, Declan purred, his voice dropping to a husky whisper, you are breathtaking, Vesper. You are everything a woman should be, sharp, elegant, powerful, and fit, sitting here with you talking. Real business. It makes me realize what I have been missing at home. I need an equal Vesper, not a dependent. I looked at him, this mediocre man who had stolen my inheritance, who had lived in my house, who had spent my father's money, and who was now sitting here insulting the very people who had given him everything. He was a parasite, convinced he was the host. I moved my hand slightly, not to pull away, but to pick up the wine bottle, refilling his glass to the brim. Keep talking, Declan, I thought. Keep digging your grave. The dirt is soft, and I have all night. It must be lonely, I said, injecting a note of sympathy into my voice, being the only visionary in a house full of people who do not understand you. Lonely is not the word. Declan sighed, taking a massive drink of the expensive wine. It is tragic, really. But that is why I was so happy when you emailed me, Vesper. I felt like finally someone sees me, someone sees the genius behind the curtain. I feel a connection with you, a real connection. Do you feel it too? He looked at me with puppy dog eyes, hoping for validation, hoping for a promise of something more than just business. I picked up my glass, holding it up to the light, examining the deep red liquid that looked so much like blood. I feel that we understand each other perfectly. Declan, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I think you are a very rare kind of man. He beamed, preening under the compliment. Oh, stop, you are making me blush. I am serious, I continued, leaning forward, my eyes locking onto his, locking him in the trap. I have met many CEOs, many founders, but a man with your specific blend of ambition and confidence is truly a dying breed. I raised my glass toward him, a toast to our future destruction. To us, Declan said, clinking his glass against mine, the sound ringing clear and sharp like a bell tolling for the dead. To a partnership that will change everything. I drank the wine, watching him gulp his down, oblivious to the fact that he had just handed me the murder weapon, oblivious. The fact that the recording device under the table had caught every racist, sexist, narcissist word, oblivious to the fact that the woman sitting across from him was not a potential lover, but the executioner he had created 10 years ago. You have no idea how much this is going to change everything. Declan, I thought, as I set the glass down and signaled for the check. You have absolutely no idea. The city of New York lay beneath me, a sprawling grid of golden light, but inside the penthouse the air was cold enough to see my breath, my head of security. Marcus stood by the fireplace, his usually stoic face etched with a grim expression that sent a shiver down my spine. He held a thick red folder in his hands, not the standard black ones we used for business acquisitions, but the red ones reserved for criminal activity and high-level threats. I set down my glass of mineral water, the condensation cold against my fingertips. Tell me, Marcus, I said, my voice steady, though my heart began to hammer a warning rhythm against my ribs. What did the forensic audit find? Did Declan embezzle more than we thought? Marcus walked over to the coffee table and placed the folder down gently, as if it contained a bomb. It is not Declan this time. Ms. St. Clair, he said, his voice low and grave. We ran a standard background check on all immediate family members as part of the due diligence process. Usually, these are routine looking for parking tickets or minor civil disputes. But when we pulled the credit history for the name Maya Vance, we found something disturbing. I froze at the sound of my old name, hearing it spoken aloud, felt like summoning a ghost, disturbing how I asked, did I have unpaid library fines from college? Marcus opened the folder, spreading out pages of credit reports, bank statements, and loan applications dating back 12 years. Maya Vance has a credit score of 420, he said, pointing to the number highlighted in neon yellow. She has 6 defaulted credit cards, a repossession order for a Mercedes-Benz C-Class, and a foreclosure on a timeshare in Florida. All of these accounts were opened between 2014 and 2018. I stared at the papers, the dates swirling in my vision. 2014 was the year I was at Harvard, living on instant noodles and scholarship money. 2018 was the year I was working 18-hour days on Wall Street, building my first fund. I had never owned a Mercedes. I had never been to Florida, and I certainly had never opened 6 credit cards. I did not open these accounts. I whispered, tracing the signature on a loan application. It was a forgery, a shaky attempt to mimic my handwriting, but the loops on the Y were unmistakable. We know, Marcus said quietly. We cross-referenced the IP addresses and the mailing addresses associated with the bills. They all lead back to one location, the Vance family estate in Atlanta. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of the marble table, my knuckles turning white. They stole my identity, I said, the realization crashing over me like a tidal wave. My parents, Reginald and Camille, they used my social security number to fund their lifestyle. It appears so. Marcus continued, turning a page. Here's the timeline. They started small. A Target store, credit card. A few months before you graduated, likely to test if you monitored your credit when you did not notice because you were too busy studying. They escalated. They took out a $50,000 personal loan in your name. The week after, they kicked you out into the snow. I felt a bile rise in my throat the week after they kicked me out while I was sleeping in a motel room, counting pennies to buy a bus ticket to New York. They were signing my name to a loan application, cashing out on the daughter they had just disowned. They bought furniture with it, Marcus said, reading from the itemized list. They bought the leather sofa set that is currently in their living room, and a diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany. Is for Serena's 21st birthday. Serena. I choked out a laugh, a harsh, jagged sound that hurt my throat. They stole my financial future to buy my sister a birthday present. And they stopped paying the bills 6 months later. Marcus added, they let the accounts go into default. Deliberately, they knew the debt collectors would come looking for Maya Vance. But since you had left and changed your name, the trail went cold. They destroyed your credit score to save their own thinking. You would never find out, because to them, you were already dead. I stood up, walking to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. The rage that filled me was not hot and fiery. It was glacial. It was absolute. They did not just discard me. I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. They tried to murder me financially in America. A credit score is not just a number. It is your ability to rent an apartment to get a job, to buy a car to survive. If I had not changed my name to Vesper St. Clair, if I had tried to build a life as Maya Vance, I would have been blocked at every turn. I would have been rejected by landlords, rejected by banks. I would have been destitute, and I would never have known why. They set a trap for me, I said, turning back to Marcus, my eyes burning dry. They wanted to make sure that if I ever tried to rise up, the world would push me back down. They wanted me to fail. They wanted me to crawl back to them begging for help so they could look down on me and say, I told you so. I looked down at my hand resting on the table. I was gripping the edge so hard that one of my manicured nails had dug into the palm, piercing the skin. A single drop of dark red blood welled up and dripped onto the white carpet. Miss St. Clair. Your hand, Marcus said, taking a step forward. I looked at the blood, mesmerizing and bright. Leave it, I said, my voice devoid of humanity. Let it stain. It reminds me of what they took. I walked back to the folder and picked up the evidence sheets, holding them with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. This was not just fraud. This was a felony, identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud across state lines. My parents, the pillars of the Atlanta community, the church elders who preached about morality, were common criminals who preyed on their own child. Does this change the deal? Marcus asked. Do we cancel the investment? I looked at him, and for a second he flinched at the darkness in my eyes. Cancel it, I asked, a terrifying smile spreading across my lips. Absolutely not. Marcus, this changes nothing about the deal, but it changes everything about the punishment. I picked up the black pen from the table and drew a thick line through the name, Maya Vance, on the credit report. Maya Vance is dead, I said, my voice ringing with finality. They killed her for $50,000 and a tennis bracelet. But they forgot one thing. When you bury a body, you better make sure it stays buried, because if it comes back as a monster. I handed the folder back to Marcus. Keep this. Safe. This is not just leverage anymore. This is the nail in their coffin tomorrow. We signed the contract, and I want you to add a new clause in the fine print, burying it deep in Section 42. What clause? Marcus asked, pulling out his notepad. A full indemnity clause regarding past financial crimes, I said, and a requirement that all liabilities, known and unknown, are transferred to the personal guarantor. I walked back to the window, looking out at the city that I had conquered. They want my money, I whispered. They can have it, but they are going to pay for it with their freedom. They tried to ruin my future, so now I am going to erase their past. The drop of blood on the carpet had soaked in, leaving a small, permanent mark, a testament to the pain that fueled me. I turned off the lights, leaving the room in darkness, save for the glow of the city, knowing that tomorrow morning I would walk into that conference room and shake the hands of the people who had tried to destroy me, and I would smile, knowing that I held the keys to their prison cells in my pocket. Men like Declan Miller are not complex creatures. They are painfully predictable, driven by a primitive need for validation that they cannot generate internally. They seek it in the mirror. They seek it in the bank accounts of their wives, and inevitably, they seek it in the beds of women who are paid to look at them with adoration. I knew Declan was cheating on Serena long before I hired the private investigator to confirm it. I knew it the moment he looked at me across the dinner table with that hungry, desperate gleam in his eyes. A man who is satisfied at home does not look at other women like a starving wolf looking at a lamb chop. Arranging the scene was almost insulting in its simplicity. I did not need a complex plan involving hidden cameras or wiretaps. I simply needed a window seat at the Palm Court in the Plaza Hotel, and a perfectly timed text message sent to Declan his burner phone from a number he thought belonged to a 22-year-old aspiring model named Jasmine, who was actually on my payroll. I sat across from Serena, watching her dissect a lobster salad with the aggression of someone who has not eaten a carb in a decade. She was talking about the gala, about the dress she was going to wear, about how the press was going to love her comeback story. She was so absorbed in her own fantasy that she did not notice how my eyes kept darting to the revolving doors of the hotel entrance. "You know, Vesper," Serena said, taking a sip of her champagne, "I really think this partnership is going to be good for us. Declan has been so stressed lately, he needs a win. And honestly, I think I am the secret weapon he needs. I am the face, he is the brain." I forced a smile, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. The brain, she called him. The man who had invested in a cryptocurrency scam 3 years ago and lost her grandmother's inheritance. "You are a team," I said, my voice neutral and smooth. "That is what makes you so strong." Loyalty. Serena, it is a rare commodity these days. Just then the revolving doors spun and Declan walked into the lobby. He was wearing a suit I recognized because I had paid for it via the company credit card. He was smiling a genuine boyish smile that I had not seen on his face in years. Hanging on his arm was Jasmine. She was stunning, tall, with skin the color of deep mahogany and hair that cascaded down her back. In natural curls, she was everything Serena used to be before she let bitterness and insecurity hollow her out. I watched Serena's face as the scene unfolded. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. She froze her fork, hovering halfway to her mouth, her eyes widening until the whites showed all around the iris. Declan stopped in the middle of the lobby, just 20 feet away from our table. He leaned down and kissed Jasmine. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a deep, lingering kiss that spoke of intimacy and possession. He whispered something in her ear and she laughed, throwing her head back, her hand resting possessively on his chest. Serena made a sound like a wounded animal, a low, strangled gasp that was drowned out by the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation around us. She dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china, but she did not seem to notice. All the blood had drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and aged under the harsh hotel lighting. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard the words barely formed. That is Declan?" I leaned forward, feigning confusion, playing the part of the concerned friend who sees nothing wrong. "Isn't that wonderful?" I said, keeping my voice bright. "He must be meeting a client. He looks very successful, doesn't he? Look at how he charms her. That is the charisma of a CEO, right there." Serena turned to look at me, and for a second, I saw the raw, unvarnished pain in her eyes. She looked at me, begging me to acknowledge what was really happening, begging me to be outraged on her behalf. "He is kissing her." "Vesper," she hissed, tears welling up in her eyes. "That is not a client. He is cheating on me right in front of everyone." I took a slow sip of my tea, watching Declan lead the girl toward the elevators, his hand sliding down to rest comfortably on her lower back. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice turning cold, losing the fake warmth. "Are you sure you want to call it cheating, Serena? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like he is enjoying himself." Serena stood up her chair, scraping against the floor. I am going to kill him. I am going to go over there and scratch his eyes out. Sit down, I said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Sharp as a whip crack. Serena froze, looking down at me, shocked by the change in my tone. Sit down, Serena, I repeated, gesturing to her chair, unless you want to blow the deal. She blinked, confusion warring with rage. What does this have to do with the deal? My husband is sleeping with a child. It has everything to do with the deal, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. The character audit. Remember I told you I invest in stability, I invest in teams. If you go over there and make a scene, if you scream and cry in the lobby of the plaza, you are proving to me that your family is volatile. You are proving that your marriage is a sham and that Declan is a liability. Serena looked at the elevator doors, which were just closing, swallowing her husband and his mistress. She looked back at me, her hands shaking violently. But he is betraying me, she whispered. I looked at her with zero sympathy, seeing only the woman who had stood by and watched while our parents destroyed my life, seeing the woman who had laughed when I was kicked out into the snow. We all make choices, Serena, I said, my voice low and lethal. Right now, you have a choice. You can be the wife who stands up for her dignity, who causes a scene and loses the $50 million investment, or you can be the smart business partner who understands that men like Declan have needs, and you can look the other way to secure your future. I picked up my napkin and dabbed my lips, watching the gears turn in her empty head. So I asked softly, what is it going to be? Serena, do you choose your pride or do you choose the money? Because you cannot have both, not with a man like him. Serena looked at the closed elevator doors one last time. I saw the battle raging inside her. I saw the moment her self-respect tried to stand up and fight. And I saw the moment she strangled it with her own greed. She slowly sank back into her chair, her movements stiff and mechanical. She picked up her glass of champagne and downed it in one gulp, her hand shaking so hard the crystal rattled against her teeth. He must be meeting a consultant, she said, her voice hollow and dead, looking at the tablecloth instead of me. Declan is very hands-on with the rebranding strategy. I smiled, a genuine smile of pure contempt. She had passed my test by failing as a human being. She had proven that she was exactly who I thought she was, a woman who would sell her soul for a designer handbag and a mansion. That is the spirit, Serena, I said, signaling the waiter for the check. Never let emotions get in the way of a transaction. You are learning. I watched her refill her glass, her eyes dead and empty, and I felt a surge of triumph. She thought she was saving the deal, but she had just signed her own death warrant. She had proven she had no moral compass, and that meant, when I destroyed them, she would have no ground to stand on. She had chosen the money over the truth. And in my world, that is a mistake you only get to make once. Drink up, sister, I thought, watching a single tear slide down her cheek and vanish into her expensive foundation. The show is just beginning, and you just agreed to play the victim. The stack of papers sitting in the center of the conference table was thick enough to be a weapon, and in my hands that is exactly what it was. 200 pages of dense legal jargon printed on heavy bonded paper bound in a black leather folder that smelled of wealth and finality. I watched my family stare at it with a mixture of greed and intimidation. They were sitting on the edge of their seats like hungry dogs, waiting for a bowl of food to be set down. Declan was practically vibrating his knee, bouncing up and down under the table, while my parents, Reginald and Camille, looked at the document as if it were the Bible, a holy text that would absolve them of all their financial sins. This is the standard partnership agreement, I said, my voice filling the silence of the room, perfectly calm and professional. It outlines the terms of the $50 million capital injection, the restructuring of the board, and the distribution of equity. I paused, walking slowly around the table, my hand trailing along the back of the leather chairs. It also includes the personal guarantee clauses. I continued, stopping behind Declan's chair, looking down at the thinning spot on the top of his head. These are non-negotiable given the precarious state of your current finances. St. Clair Capital requires absolute security. Declan waved his hand dismissively, reaching for the folder without hesitation. Personal guarantees, sure. Sure. Standard stuff, Vesper. We are all in this together, right? I watched him open the folder, flipping past the table of contents, skipping the definitions, skipping the risk assessment. He was looking for the signature page. He was looking for the money. You might want to read. Section 42, subsection C. I said quietly, offering him a lifeline. I knew he would not take it. Is the clause regarding ethical compliance and moral turpitude. It is quite specific about the consequences of any behavior that could damage the reputation of the partnership. Declan laughed, a loud, barking sound that grated on my nerves. Ethical compliance. Vesper, please look at us. We are the Vances. We are the definition of ethics. My father-in-law is a deacon, for Christ's sake. He did not turn to page 142. If he had, he would have seen a paragraph written by the most ruthless contract lawyers in New York, a paragraph that stated in no uncertain terms that any act of dishonesty, fraud, infidelity, or criminal activity committed by the managing partners would result in an immediate default. A default that did not just terminate the deal, but triggered the total forfeiture of all personal assets pledged as collateral. That meant everything: the house in Atlanta, the cars, the retirement accounts, the jewelry, even the clothes on their backs. If they lied, if they cheated, if they broke the law, everything they owned became mine. Reginald leaned forward, trying to look authoritative. Do we really need to read all 200 pages? Ms. St. Clair, our lawyer charges $500 an hour to review documents, and right now cash flow is a bit tight. I looked at my father, the man who had scrutinized every report card I ever brought home, the man who had lectured me for hours about reading the fine print before I signed my student loan documents. It is your choice. Mr. Vance, I said simply, my voice devoid of warmth. You are free to take the document to your legal counsel. We can reconvene next week. Next week! Declan practically shouted, his eyes widening in panic. No, no, we cannot wait until next week. The bank is breathing down our necks, Vesper. We need the liquidity today. Then you sign today, I said, sliding a heavy Mont Blanc pen across the table toward him, the black resin gleaming under the chandelier lights. Declan picked up the pen, weighing it in his hand. He looked up at me, and for a second, the arrogance slipped, and I saw the desperate boy beneath. But then he looked at the $50 million figure on the first page, and the greed took over again. He smiled, that oily, charming smile that had fooled my sister and my parents for a decade. You know, Vesper, he said, uncapping the pen, my lawyers would have a heart attack if they knew I was signing this without them looking at it. They are always so paranoid, telling me to watch out for sharks. He leaned back, winking at me as if we shared a secret. But I trust you, he said, his voice dripping with false intimacy. I feel like we have a connection. You are not out to get us. You are here to help us ascend. I trust your vision, Vesper. I trust you. I repeated the words internally, tasting the irony, like a fine wine. He trusted the woman he had just sexually harassed over dinner. He trusted the investor whose sister he was cheating on. He trusted the stranger whose life he had ruined 10 years ago. That means a lot to me, Declan, I said, my face a mask of polite gratitude. Trust is the foundation of any good slaughter. I mean partnership. He did not hear the slip, or maybe he chose to ignore it. He bent over the document and signed his name with a flourish, the nib of the pen, scratching loud and harsh against the paper, a sound that echoed in the quiet room like a key turning in a lock. He passed the folder to Serena. Sign it. Babe, he said, we are going to be rich. Serena did not even look at the pages. She was too busy looking at her reflection in the window, checking her lipstick. She signed her name quickly, carelessly, just as she had lived her entire life. Then the folder went to Reginald, and finally to Camille. I watched my mother pick up the pen. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering over the line labeled Guarantor. "Are you sure this is the only way?" she asked, looking up at me, her eyes searching mine for that familiar spirit she had mentioned before. "It is the only way to save the house," I said softly, knowing exactly which button to press. "Without this money, the bank takes the keys on Monday." That was all she needed to hear. She signed her name, sealing her fate. When the folder slid back across the table to me, I placed my hand on it, feeling the heat of their signatures still fresh on the paper. It was done. They had just voluntarily handed me the legal right to strip them bare. They had signed away their shelter, their security, and their future, all because they were too arrogant to read the fine print and too greedy to question a miracle. "Excellent," I said, closing the folder with a sharp snap that made Serena jump. I picked up the phone on the console table and dialed my finance department. "Authorize the wire transfer," I said, my eyes never leaving. "Declan is face $50 million into the Vance Declan operating account." Effective immediately, Declan let out a whoop of joy, jumping up from his chair and pumping his fist in the air. "Yes," he shouted, grabbing Serena and spinning her around. "We are back, baby. The Vances are back on top." My parents were hugging each other, tears streaming down their faces, thanking God and thanking Declan for his brilliance. "Thank you, Vesper," Declan said, leaning across the table to shake my hand, his palm damp with sweat. "You will not regret this. We are going to make you so much money." I took his hand, feeling the weakness in his grip, the softness of a man who had never done a day of hard labor in his life. "I have no doubt." "Declan," I said, giving his hand a firm squeeze that hurt him slightly, "I am sure I will get exactly what I paid for." As they gathered their coats, chattering excitedly about where they were going to celebrate dinner at Le Bernardin, shopping at Bergdorf Goodman tomorrow, buying a new Porsche, I stood silently at the head of the table watching them. They were celebrating their own funeral, and they did not even know they were dead yet. "Enjoy tonight," I said, as they headed for the door, my voice stopping them for a moment. They turned back, smiling, the smiles of the blissfully ignorant. "Why shouldn't we?" Declan asked, grinning. "We just won the lottery." "Because tomorrow the real work begins," I said simply. They laughed, agreeing, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the contract. I opened the folder again, turning to page 142. I ran my finger over the clause section. 42, subsection C. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and now all I had to do was wait. For them to step on the trigger, I walked to the window looking out at the city skyline, feeling the weight of the contract in my hands. It was heavy, but it felt good. It felt like justice. They thought they had sold a stake in their company, but they had sold their souls. And unlike the devil, I had no intention of letting them buy them back. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of black ties and blinding camera flashes. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the crisp ozone scent of anticipation. I stood in the velvet shadows of stage left, hidden from the glare of the spotlights, watching the scene unfold with the detached precision of a director, watching the final act of a tragedy. I had spared no expense for this evening. I wanted the setting to be perfect. I wanted the fall to be spectacular. Every major financial news outlet was here, from Bloomberg to the Wall Street Journal. Not because they cared about Vance Declan Enterprises, but because I had promised them the story of the decade. I had promised them a scoop that would make their careers, and when Vesper St. Clair makes a promise, the world listens. The Vance family was currently making their entrance, and it was a masterclass in delusion. They walked down the red carpet toward the stage, looking like royalty from a kingdom that did not exist. Serena was wearing a crimson gown that dragged slightly on the floor because she had been too cheap to pay for tailoring. It was a rental. I knew this because I had seen the charge on the corporate card under miscellaneous office supplies. She was waving to the photographers, blowing kisses to people she did not know, soaking up the attention like a flower drinking poison. My parents, Reginald and Camille, were walking behind her, clutching each other. His hands. My father was wearing a tuxedo that was a size too small across the chest, straining against the weight of his own ego. My mother was dripping in diamonds that were actually high-quality cubic zirconia, though she was smiling. As if they were the crown jewels. They looked proud. They looked vindicated. They looked like people who believed they had finally arrived at the destination they deserved. And then there was Declan, the man of the hour, the architect of their ruin. He strode onto the stage with his arms raised, soaking in the applause that I had paid for. He looked healthy, flush with the $50 million I had injected into his accounts, unaware that the money was merely the anesthetic. Before the surgery, he adjusted the microphone, tapping it twice, a sound that echoed through the cavernous room, silencing the crowd. "Thank you. Thank you, everyone," Declan boomed, his voice filled with a practiced gravitas that made my skin crawl. "It is truly humbling to stand here before you tonight, surrounded by the titans of industry, to celebrate not just a company, but a legacy." He paused, looking out at the crowd with misty eyes, a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "When I married into the Vance family 10 years ago," he continued, pacing the stage like a televangelist, "I saw something that no one else saw. I saw potential buried under the weight of tradition. I saw a diamond in the rough. People told me I was crazy. People told me to walk away," they said. "Declan, why are you wasting your talent on a small family business in Atlanta? Why not go to Silicon Valley?" He chuckled, shaking his head at his own imaginary heroism. "But I could not walk away, because I believe in family. I believe that when you marry someone, you marry their dreams, and I promised my wife, Serena, and her wonderful parents, that I would take the name Vance and write it across the sky in neon lights." I stood in the wings, my arms crossed over my chest, feeling the cold steel of the remote control in my hand. He was lying with such ease, such fluidity, it was almost impressive. He had not married into potential. He had married into a piggy bank. He had not seen a diamond. He had seen a credit score he could exploit. And tonight, Declan shouted, his voice rising to a crescendo. "Tonight, we celebrate the rebirth of that dream, thanks to our strategic partnership with the St. Clair Fund. We are launching a new era of innovation. We are proving that with hard work, with integrity, and with faith, you can overcome any obstacle." The crowd applauded politely, mostly because the open bar was waiting. But Declan took it as a standing ovation. He beckoned for my parents and Serena to join him. Center stage. "Come on up here," he said. "Come stand with me. This is your moment too." My family scuttled onto the stage, beaming under the hot lights. My mother wiped a tear from her eye. My father puffed out his chest and Serena posed, angling her body to look thinner for the cameras. They stood there, a united front of lies, holding hands, looking out at the world they thought they had conquered. "I want to take a moment," Declan said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "to thank the person who made this possible. A woman who saw my vision when everyone else was blind, the magnificent Vesper St. Clair." He swept his hand toward the empty side of the stage, expecting me to walk out and join them, expecting me to stand there and validate his delusion, expecting me to be the final prop in his play. But I did not move. I stayed in the shadows, watching him scan the wings, confusion flickering in his eyes when I did not appear. "She must be shy," Declan joked nervously, laughing into the microphone. "But that is okay. We know she is watching. We know she is cheering us on." I looked at the technician sitting in the sound booth, a young man named Leo who I had hired specifically for this moment because he had no loyalty to anyone but the person signing his check. Leo was looking at me, his finger hovering over the enter key on his console, waiting for the command. Declan turned back to the crowd, regaining his composure. "Well, no matter. We have prepared a special video presentation to showcase the journey of the Vance family, a retrospective of our hard work and our values. Please turn your attention to the main screen. The massive LED screen behind them flickered to life, displaying the Vance Declan Enterprises logo in gold against a black background. Dramatic music began to swell, a triumphant orchestral score that sounded like the soundtrack to a superhero movie. Declan put his arm around Serena, pulling her close, posing for the photo op that would accompany the video. He whispered something in her ear, probably telling her how rich they were going to be, how they were the kings of New York. I looked at them one last time, 4 small figures standing in the spotlight, blinded by their own arrogance. They looked so happy, so secure, so utterly oblivious to the cliff edge they were standing on. I thought about the girl in the snow 10 years ago. I thought about the graduation cap in the trash can. I thought about the credit score of 420. I thought about the woman who had to die so Vesper could live. "It is time," I whispered into the darkness. I raised my hand and my hand caught Leo. I gave him a single sharp nod, the signal to drop the guillotine. Leo pressed the key. The triumphant music cut out abruptly, replaced by a sharp screech of audio feedback that made the audience cover their ears. The gold logo on the screen distorted, glitching violently before vanishing completely. The stage went black for a second, plunging my family into darkness. "What is going on?" Declan's voice rang out in the sudden silence. "Hey, tech support, we lost the feed." And then the screen lit up again. But this time there was no gold logo, there was no triumphant music, there was only the grainy timestamp of a security camera and the unmistakable image of a hotel lobby. "The show has begun," I said, stepping forward to the edge of the curtain, ready to watch them burn, and for the first time all night I smiled, a real smile, because the truth was about to make its entrance, and it was not wearing a rental tuxedo. The static on the massive LED screen cleared, instantly replaced by a high-definition video feed that was crystal clear and dangerously loud. The image was grainy at first, a hidden camera angle looking up from under a table, but the audio was perfect. It was the sound of a restaurant, the clinking of silverware, and the unmistakable voice of Declan Miller echoing through the Pierre Hotel ballroom. I watched from the wings as the smile slid off Declan, his face like oil sliding off water. He turned around to look at the screen, his mouth open in confusion, but the voice continued, magnified by the concert-grade speakers. "She is just baggage," the voice on the screen said dismissively, referring to Serena. "She has let herself go. Vesper. She is obsessed with social media because she has nothing else going on. She is aging, and she is not doing it gracefully." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom like a gust of wind. Hundreds of people turned their heads to look at Serena, who was standing center stage in her red dress, looking like she had been slapped. Her hand flew to her, mouth her eyes wide with shock as she listened to her husband describe her to another woman. The video cut to a new clip, this one from the lobby of the Plaza Hotel, showing Declan kissing the young model Jasmine. The footage was zoomed in, capturing every detail, the way his hand rested on her lower back, the intimate whisper in her ear, the way he looked at her with a hunger he had not shown his wife in a decade. "That is a lie!" Declan shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking with panic. "Turn it off! It is a deepfake! It is someone is trying to frame me." Tech support cut the feed, but the feed did not cut. Instead, it split into 2 screens. On the left was the video of Declan cheating, and on the right documents began to appear, scrolling slowly, so everyone in the room could read them. They were bank statements, specifically, the unauthorized withdrawals from the company accounts used to pay for the rental of the Lake Como villa for his mistress, and the purchase of a diamond necklace that Serena was definitely not wearing tonight. The crowd began to murmur, the polite silence of the gala dissolving into the excited buzzing of scandal. Wealthy people love nothing more than watching one of their own fall, and tonight they were getting a front row seat to a public execution. Serena finally moved. She turned on her heel and slapped Declan across the face. The sound echoed through the microphone, a sharp crack that silenced the murmurs for a second. "You liar!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You told me she was a consultant." But the show was not over, not even close. The screen flashed again, and this time the background changed from black to red, blinking with the words, "Forensic Audit, Identity Theft." My parents, Reginald and Camille, who had been standing slightly behind Declan, trying to distance themselves from his infidelity, suddenly found themselves in the spotlight. The screen displayed a series of credit card applications from 10 years ago, applications signed with the name Maya Vance. But bearing the handwriting of Camille Vance next to them were the foreclosure notices sent to my college dorm room and the collection agency letters threatening legal action against a 22-year-old girl for debts she did not incur. The voice of a narrator, which was actually a synthesized version of my own voice, began to read the findings aloud. In 2014, Reginald and Camille Vance fraudulently used the Social Security number of their estranged daughter, Maya Vance, to secure loans totaling $50,000. These funds were not used for emergencies, but for luxury goods, including a Steinway piano and a European vacation. Simultaneously, they allowed the credit score of their daughter to plummet to 400, ensuring her financial isolation. My mother let out a wail, clutching her chest, looking out at the audience as if begging for sympathy. But there was no sympathy to be found. The faces looking back at her were cold and judgmental in this room. Stealing money was a sin, but stealing from your own child to pretend you were rich was a cardinal sin that stripped you of all social standing. Reginald tried to grab the microphone from Declan, who was currently holding his cheek and staring at the floor. "This is a misunderstanding," my father shouted, his voice booming and desperate. "We were managing her assets. She abandoned us. We had a right as parents to recoup our investment in her education." Booing started from the back of the room, low at first, then growing louder. Someone laughed, a harsh, cruel laugh that seemed to trigger the rest of the crowd. They were not just witnessing a scandal, they were witnessing the unmasking of frauds, and they were delighted. The screen changed one last time, bringing up the final nail in the coffin. It showed the internal server logs of Vance Declan Enterprises. The same logs I had seen on the iPad all those years ago, but updated with current data columns of red text, scrolled past, showing thousands of bot accounts generated in Bangladesh and Russia, artificially inflating the user numbers of the PetFit app by 98%. The narrator voice returned cold and factual. Vance Declan Enterprises has been operating a Ponzi scheme for 7 years, using new investor capital to pay personal debts and fabricate growth. There are no users. There is no revenue. There is only fraud. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from gossip to anger. Many of the people in this room had invested in Declan's vision. Many of them had written checks based on those fake numbers. The murmur turned into shouting. "That is my money!" someone yelled from the front row. "I want them arrested!" shouted another. Declan looked like a trapped animal. He looked at the screen, then at the angry crowd, then at the exit signs. But the doors were blocked by security guards, who I had instructed to let no one leave. My family stood center stage, huddled together, not out of love, but out of terror. The spotlight, which had been warm and welcoming moments ago, now felt like an interrogation lamp searing their flaws for the world to see. The crimson dress looked cheap under the harsh light. The tuxedo looked ill-fitting. The diamonds looked fake. They were stripped bare. Their lies peeled away layer by layer until there was nothing left but their greed and their mediocrity. They looked small. They looked pathetic. And for the first time in their lives, they looked truly ashamed. I watched from the darkness, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. It was done. The facade was shattered. The Vance family name, which they had protected with such viciousness, was now synonymous with theft and betrayal. I signaled to Leo in the sound booth, and he killed the video feed, plunging the room into total darkness. For a dramatic 3 seconds, The silence that followed was heavy with shock. Then a single spotlight cut through the blackness, ignoring the family on stage and landing directly on the curtain where I was standing. It was time. The final act. It was time for the ghost to walk among the living and claim what was hers. I took a deep breath, smoothing the silk of my dress, and stepped out of the shadows into the blinding white light, ready to deliver the eulogy for the family that had died the night they forgot my graduation. The silence in the grand ballroom was heavier than the darkness that had swallowed the stage moments before. Thousands of eyes were fixed on the single beam of white light cutting through the gloom. And I stepped into it, with the calm stride of a woman walking through her own front door. The sound of my heels striking the stage floor echoed like the ticking of a countdown clock. I walked past my family, who were frozen in a tableau of terror. Declan was clutching the podium as if it were a life raft, his face pale and sweating. Serena was holding her cheek, where she had slapped him, her mascara running in dark rivulets down her face, and my parents were clinging to each other, looking small and frail. Under the scrutiny of the crowd, I stopped center stage, taking the microphone from the stand. The metal felt cold and solid in my hand. I did not look at the audience. I turned my body slightly so I was facing the four people who had shaped me and then tried to break me. "You seem confused," I said, my voice amplified and crystal clear, cutting through the tension. "You are looking for someone to blame for the fraud, aren't you? You are looking for the scapegoat you created 10 years ago." Reginald looked up at me, his eyes squinting against the glare. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "You are supposed to be our partner." I laughed, a low, humorless sound that chilled the air. "Partner," I repeated, tasting the word. "Oh, Reginald. I was never your partner. I was your retirement plan that you threw away." I raised my hand and signaled to the booth one last time. "Look at the screen." Behind us, the massive LED display flared to life again. But this time, there were no documents, no bank statements. There was just a photograph. A high-resolution image of a 22-year-old girl standing in the snow wearing a thin coat and clutching a suitcase. She looked tired, she looked broken, and she looked exactly like the daughter they had erased from their memories. The crowd murmured, recognizing the girl from the narration moments earlier. Then the image began to change. It was a slow morph, a digital transformation that layered the present over the past. The girl in the snow began to stand taller. Her hair changed from braids to a sharp bob, her nose refined by surgery, her clothes transforming from thrift store wool to Italian silk, until the image on the screen was a perfect mirror of the woman standing on the stage. The face of Maya Vance vanished and the face of Vesper St. Clair took its place. The realization hit them like a physical blow. My mother Camille let out a scream that sounded like tearing metal. It was a sound of pure primal recognition mixed with absolute horror. Her hands flew to her mouth, and her knees gave way. She collapsed onto the stage floor, her expensive dress pooling around her. "It is her!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "It cannot be! It is her!" Reginald staggered back, knocking over a flower arrangement, his eyes bulging out of his head. "No," he gasped, clutching his chest. "No, Maya is dead. We killed her. I mean, she is gone." I stepped closer to them, towering over my father, who was now cowering against the backdrop. "Maya is dead," I said, my voice hard as diamond. "She died the night you forced her out into the blizzard. She died the moment you stole her identity to buy a piano. She died because you killed her to save your precious Declan." I turned to Declan, who was staring at me with a look of dawning horror that was almost comical. He was realizing that the woman he had tried to seduce, the woman he had called his soulmate, The woman he had trash-talked his wife to was the same woman he had mocked and evicted a decade ago. "You knew," Declan whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of green. "You knew everything at dinner, the hotel." I leaned in close so he could smell the expensive perfume he had complimented earlier. "I knew everything, Declan, because I lived it. I remember every word you said to me. I remember you calling me a computer with legs. I remember you telling me I was useless. And I remember you telling me last night that your wife was baggage." Serena let out a sob, looking from me to the screen and back again. "Maya," she whimpered, reaching out a hand toward me. Why did you do this?" I looked at my sister, the golden child who had never worked a day in her life, who had watched me suffer with a smile on her face. "I did not do this, Serena," I said, cold and unyielding. "You did this. You signed the contract. You took the money. You lived the lie." I just turned on the lights. I turned back to face the audience, the hundreds of reporters and investors who were watching this real-life tragedy unfold with bated breath. "They told you I was an angel investor," I said, my voice booming through the hall. "They told you I was here to save their legacy, but they forgot to tell you where that legacy came from." I gestured to the weeping figures on the floor behind me. "They built their lives on the back of a daughter they despised. They stole my name, they stole my credit, and they tried to steal my future. But the thing about the truth is that it is patient. It waits, it grows, and eventually it comes home." I looked down at my father, who was trying to crawl toward me, reaching for the hem of my pants, perhaps to beg, perhaps to strike me. "Please, Vesper," he choked out. "Please, we are family." I took a step back, moving out of his reach. "Vesper. St. Clair has no family," I said simply. "Vesper. St. Clair is a business entity created for one purpose only." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. "To acquire distressed assets and liquidate them." I looked at the camera flashing in the back of the room, making sure the world heard my next words. "You thought I was your savior? Reginald? You thought I was the answer to your prayers?" I shook my head, a small terrified smile playing on my lips. "I am not an investor," I whispered, but the microphone caught every syllable. "I am Karma, and I have come to collect the debt." The applause had died instantly, replaced by a sound that was far more satisfying, the heavy rhythmic thud of boots hitting the stage floor. 6 men in dark windbreakers moved through the crowd, parting the sea of stunned investors like sharks moving through a school of fish. They did not look like the hotel security, they looked like federal consequences. And on the back of their jackets in bold yellow letters were 3 letters that every white-collar criminal fears: FBI. Declan saw them coming, and for a second, I thought he might try to run, but there was nowhere to go. The stage was a dead end, and he was the rat trapped in the corner. He backed away, knocking over the podium, the microphone feeding back with a high-pitched squeal that made everyone wince. "Gentlemen," he stammered, holding his hands up, his voice pitching into a hysterical falsetto. "This is a misunderstanding. I am a disruptor. I am a tech visionary. You cannot touch me. I have rights." "Declan Miller," the lead agent said, his voice booming without the need for amplification. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No," Declan screamed as the agent grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind him with professional indifference. "No, look at the screen, that is AI, that is deepfake, Vesper. Tell them we are partners." I stood motionless just 10 feet away, watching the cold steel of the handcuffs click around his wrists. It was a sound I had dreamed of for 10 years, a sharp mechanical snap that signaled the end of his reign. The man who had called himself a savior, the man who had looked down on me because of my race and my gender, was now being bent over a table and read his Miranda rights in front of the very people he had tried to impress. My parents? Reginald and Camille were huddled together, watching their golden boy get dragged away. Their faces, masks of absolute confusion. They turned to me, their eyes pleading. Surely I would stop this. Surely I would not let the family name be tarnished like this. Vesper, my father cried out, stepping toward me, his hands shaking. Do something, tell them who we are. Use your lawyers, get him out of this. I looked at Marcus, my head of security, who was standing in the wings, holding a thick manila envelope. I nodded once. Marcus walked onto the stage, not toward the police, but toward my parents. He stopped in front of them and extended the envelope. What is this? My mother asked, her voice trembling. It is a notice of eviction, Marcus said, his voice flat and professional, and a seizure of assets order. My father snatched the envelope, tearing it open with frantic fingers. He pulled out the document, his eyes scanning the header, his knees buckling. As he read the words per, the terms of the partnership agreement signed yesterday, Marcus explained, loud enough for the reporters in the front row to hear, you are in violation of the Morality and Criminal Liability Clause section 42 subsection C, clearly states that any criminal indictment or proof of prior fraud triggers an immediate default. Reginald looked up at me, the paper shaking in his hand. You cannot do this, he whispered. The house, the vineyard, everything, everything, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. You pledged your personal assets as collateral. Reginald, you signed the guarantee. You bet your life on a lie, and you lost effective immediately. The deed to the estate in Atlanta belongs to the St. Clair Fund. My team is already there, changing the locks as we speak. My mother let out a wail that sounded like a dying animal. Not the house, she sobbed. Not the house. It has been in the family for generations. It was in the family, I corrected her, until you used it to bail out a fraudster now. It is mine, and unlike you, I do not tolerate tenants who do not pay their debts. The police were dragging Declan off the stage now, his screams echoing through the ballroom. I will sue you, Vesper. I will kill you. I watched him go, feeling absolutely nothing but a cool sense of completion. The cancer had been cut out. And then there was Serena. She was standing alone, center stage, the crimson dress that she thought made her look like a queen, now making her look like a bloodstain on the floor. She looked at her husband being hauled away. She looked at our parents clutching the eviction notice, and then she looked at me. She took a step forward, her face streaked with mascara, her eyes wide and wet. She looked like the little sister I used to braid hair for, the little sister I used to protect from bullies until she became the bully. Maya. She whimpered, reaching out a hand toward me. Please, you cannot leave us like this. We have nowhere to go. I stared at her hand, the same hand that had held the wine glass while she laughed at my eviction 10 years ago. Stop, I said the single word, stopping her in her tracks. We are sisters, Serena sobbed, tears dripping off her chin. Blood is thicker than water, Maya. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. I am sorry. Okay. I am sorry for what happened. But please help us. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I looked for a trace of the sister I used to love. I looked for a shred of genuine remorse. But all I saw was a woman terrified of being poor. All I saw was a parasite looking for a new host. I took a step closer to her, invading her personal space, until I was towering over her in my heels. You are confused, I said, my voice low and lethal. You are speaking to a ghost. Maya, please, Serena begged, trying to grab my arm. I pulled back sharply, as if her touch were contagious. My name is Vesper St. Clair, I said, my voice rising, so the cameras could catch every word. And you need to listen very carefully, because I am only going to say this. Once Serena looked at me, her lip trembling, waiting for the mercy she thought she was entitled to. You say we are sisters, I continued, my eyes boring into hers, but sisters protect each other. Sisters do not stand by and watch their sibling get thrown out into a blizzard. Sisters do not spend their sibling's stolen identity on birthday presents. I pointed to the screen where the image of the young Maya Vance was still fading away. "That girl is dead," I said, pointing to the photo. "And you helped kill her." "But we are family," Serena whispered, a broken, desperate sound. I straightened up, smoothing my jacket, looking at her with the cold indifference of a stranger. I looked at the chaos around us, the police, the reporters, the ruined parents, and the weeping sister. "I do not know who you people are," I said, my voice ice cold. Serena gasped. "But I am your sister." I looked her dead in the eye and delivered the final blow. "I am an only child," I said. I turned my back on them, the heavy silk of my dress swirling around me, and walked toward the exit stairs. Marcus fell in step beside me, blocking Serena as she tried to follow Miss St. Clair. "Wait!" she screamed. "Wait!" I did not look back. I walked down the stairs and into the blinding flash of the paparazzi cameras, not as a victim, not as a daughter, and certainly not as a sister. I walked out as Vesper St. Clair, the woman who had just bought her freedom with the wreckage of her past, and as the doors of the ballroom closed behind me, muffling the screams of the family, I used to know I felt the first true breath of air fill my lungs in 10 years. The fluorescent lights of the Federal Detention Center hummed with a headache-inducing frequency that drove Declan Miller to the brink of madness every single day. For 30 days he had sat in a 6x8 concrete cell, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with his pale complexion. Gone were the tailored Italian suits, gone was the Patek Philippe watch, and gone was the arrogance that had been his armor for a decade now. He was just inmate number 7492. A man who had traded his freedom for a taste of a life he did not earn. He spent his days staring at the peeling paint on the wall, wondering how a plan that seemed so perfect could have unraveled so spectacularly. He still told the guards he was a visionary. He still told his court-appointed lawyer that it was all a misunderstanding, but nobody was listening anymore. The world had moved on, leaving him to rot in the ruins of his own ego. Across town, in a dingy diner on the outskirts of Atlanta, where the air smelled of stale grease and despair, Serena Vance was learning the true meaning of service. She wore a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big and comfortable shoes that were ugly but necessary for a 10-hour shift. On her feet, her hands, once used only for unboxing luxury goods and holding champagne flutes, were now red and chapped from scrubbing tables and washing dishes. "Hey waitress, table 4 needs a refill, a truck," driver shouted, waving his empty mug. Serena flinched, biting her lip to keep from screaming. "Coming," she called out, her voice thin and defeated. She grabbed the coffee pot, her eyes stinging with tears. She had tried to call her friends, the influencers and the socialites who had drank her wine and eaten her food, but nobody answered her calls. Her number had been blocked by the entire zip code. She was alone, trapped in a purgatory of her own making, serving people she used to look down on, praying that nobody recognized the woman who had once claimed to be the Queen of Atlanta. In a cramped one-bedroom apartment in government-subsidized housing, Reginald and Camille Vance sat in silence. The television was on, playing a rerun of a game show, but neither of them was watching. They were staring at the walls, which were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing next door. All their furniture was gone, seized by the marshals. All their jewelry was gone, sold to pay for a lawyer who had lost any way they had. Nothing left but each other, and the crushing weight of their regret. Every time the wind blew, they flinched, remembering the night they had sent their daughter out into the storm. Now they were the ones in the cold, and there was no one coming to save them. Miles away from their misery, I stood on the sprawling lawn of the Vance estate. The grass had grown long and wild, reaching for my ankles as if trying to pull me down into the earth. One last time, the house loomed before me, a massive brick monument to vanity and lies. The windows were dark, The doors were boarded up and the silence that surrounded it was heavy and final. A man in a hard hat walked up to me clutching a clipboard, looking nervous. "Miss St. Clair," he said, clearing his throat. "The crew is ready, we can start the demolition immediately. But I just wanted to ask, are you sure you do not want to salvage anything? The marble in the foyer is imported, and the chandelier is crystal." I looked at the house, remembering the coldness of the kitchen floor where I had eaten my meals alone, remembering the sound of my father locking his office door, remembering the way my mother looked at Declan with pride and at me with disgust. "I do not want a single brick," I said, my voice steady. "Destroy it all." "But the foundation," the foreman asked. "Should we keep the foundation? It would save money on the new build." "No," I said, turning to look him in the eye. Pull up every root, every stone, every pipe. The foundation is rotten. I cannot build a sanctuary on poisoned ground." I turned back to the house, watching as the massive yellow excavator roared to life, its metal claw rising into the air like the hand of judgment. This house was a prison. I said more to myself than to the foreman. I am going to turn it into a fortress. I had already approved the blueprints for the new construction. It would not be a mansion for one wealthy family. It would be the Maya Vance Center for Girls, a state-of-the-art shelter and educational facility for young women who had been abandoned by their families just like I had been. It would be a place where they would be told they were smart, where they would be told they were worthy, and where they would be given the tools to build their own empires without needing to change their names. The excavator swung its arm and the metal teeth tore into the roof of the master bedroom with a deafening crash. Shingles and wood rained down, and a cloud of dust rose into the air, carrying the ghosts of the past with it. I watched as the walls crumbled, exposing the empty rooms where so many lies had been told. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Marcus. "The jet is fueled and ready for takeoff. Miss St. Clair, your next meeting is in Tokyo in 14 hours. I looked at the destruction one last time, watching the chimney collapse inward, burying the fireplace where Declan had posed for his photos. It was done. The debt was paid. The ledger was balanced. I turned my back on the rubble and walked toward the waiting black SUV, my heels clicking on the pavement, a rhythm of victory. I did not feel sad. I did not feel nostalgic. I felt light, as if gravity had finally released its hold on me. 40 minutes later, I was 30,000 feet in the air, staring out the window of my Gulf Stream. The world below was a tapestry of lights shining in the darkness. I held a glass of vintage champagne, the bubbles rising to the surface in a golden stream. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The woman looking back at me was strong. She was untouchable, and she was finally free. "They called me Maya," I whispered to the empty cabin, touching the cold glass with my fingertips. Maya meant illusion, and for a long time, that is what I was, an illusion of a daughter in a family that did not see me. I took a sip of the champagne, letting the cool liquid wash away the last of the dust from my throat. "But Vesper," I said, a smile touching my lips. "Vesper means evening star." I looked out at the vast, endless night sky where a single bright star was glowing defiant and beautiful against the black void. "Most people are afraid of the dark," I said, leaning back into the leather seat, closing my eyes, and letting the hum of the engines lull me into peace. But I am not afraid anymore, because it is only when the sun goes down and the darkness falls that I truly shine. The plane banked, left turning toward the east, toward the sunrise, toward the future, and I left the ruins of the Vance family far behind in the shadows where they belonged. This story serves as a powerful reminder that your value is not determined by the people who fail to see it. Familial rejection is one of the deepest wounds a human can suffer. But as we saw with Vesper, it can also be the catalyst for extraordinary transformation. True power comes from financial independence and the courage to rewrite your own narrative when the people who are supposed to protect you become your predators. You have every right to become your own savior. Loyalty is a two-way street, and you owe nothing to those who bankrupted your spirit. If this story of justice and rebirth resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming the odds and reclaiming your power. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that being the black sheep just means you are the only one who can see the wolf. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to cut ties to save your future? I read every single story, and I am rooting for you until next time. Remember, you are the architect of your own life. Build it strong.